Hello students, this is your Professor Trajkovic. Today I'm doing a presentation on a museum object, and the object that I'm presenting on today is the Sarajevo Haggadah, which is a Jewish religious manuscript that dates back to 1350. It is on a permanent exhibit in Sarajevo National Museum of Culture and History in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where I'm from. I had an opportunity to visit the museums and to see this permanent exhibit in July of 2022 when I traveled back home to visit my family. I do want to mention that this was the first time I was able to visit the museums after about 30 years. And the reason for that is that there was a civil war in my country that started in early 90s and lasted for 4 years. During that time, the museums were heavily damaged. So after the war, the museums were closed for renovation, restoration projects, and unfortunately at times because of lack of funding. So this summer when I went back home, that was the first time I had an opportunity to visit all of the museums after such a long period of time. And the reason I picked this subject is because I feel personally connected to it. But I also see connections between this object and my city, the city of Sarajevo, which is where I'm from, as I already mentioned. So let me tell you why. I want to talk a little bit about the history of the city first. My city has a very long and rich history that dates back all the way to the Stone Age. So as you can imagine, in the museums, you can find a wealth of artifacts that date all the way back to that age. From pottery to stone objects, metal objects such as weapons, to stone throne that was built for the only independent Bosnian queen, Queen Jelena, in the 14th century. The Sarajevo Valley had settlements for various prominent cultures, from the Illyrians to the Romans, the Goths, and the Slavs at different parts of the history. Sarajevo, as it is known today, was founded by the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century. The Ottomans ruled the city for over 400 years, and evidence of that can be found throughout the city. To this day, there are many objects, cultural objects, buildings, even bridges that are used to this date that were built during that period of time. Turks heavily invested in the architecture of the city during the time they ruled. But then in the late 19th century, the city got occupied by the Austro-Hungarians, who also invested heavily in the architecture of the city and the buildings. Unfortunately, the city is also known for the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria in 1940. Unfortunately, this event led to other chain of events that eventually led to the World War I. So as you can see, the city has not only long history, but very turbulent history. The city is also known as the Jerusalem of Europe, or Jerusalem of the Balkans. And the reason for that is that it has a very rich ethnic and religious diversity. There is an Orthodox church that was built between 12th and 14th century. There's a mosque that was built in 1530, the synagogue that was built in 1581, and then a cathedral that was built in 1884. These prominent religious objects were all built within walking distance from one another in the same neighborhood, the old part of the city. And this is something that can be found only in few cities, in few major cities in Europe. So the city was always a home to different religions. During the Civil War from 1992 to 1996, many of these objects and cultural heritage got heavily damaged or completely destroyed. For example, the Bosnian National and Universal Library got completely destroyed, and that's the building you see in this picture, the one with yellow, beige, and or kind of orange brownish stripes. That building went up in flames in August of 1992. 2 million books and about 500 invaluable manuscripts from the Ottoman era got completely burned. So the Sarajevo Haggadah. This is an illuminated manuscript that contains the illustrated traditional text of Passover Haggadah. So it is used during the first 2 nights of Passover, Jewish holiday, very important Jewish holiday. This is the oldest Sephardic Haggadah in the world to this date, and it originated in Barcelona in 1350. So you can see that this manuscript is almost as old as my city. And this manuscript is handwritten on bleached calfskin, and it is illuminated in copper and in gold. Now, the history of Haggadah is also very long, obviously, but also very rich and turbulent, just like my cities. Historians believe that it was taken out of the Iberian Peninsula by Jews who were expelled in 1492. Then it resurfaced again in Italy in the 16th century. It was sold to the National Museum of Sarajevo in 1894 by a Jewish man. But then, during the World War II, it almost got destroyed. During the World War II, as you probably know, hundreds of thousands of Jewish people were killed by Nazis, and every single religious book that they were able to get their hands on got destroyed. So the story goes that Nazis came to the museum to get the Haggadah, and at that time the museum's chief librarian, Dervish Korkut, basically told them that the book was already taken out of the museum. So he risked his life for this manuscript. He smuggled it out of the city into a mountainous village where he asked the Muslim cleric to hide the manuscript in the mosque until the war is over. And that's how the manuscript survived the Second World War. But then again, in 1992, Haggadah manuscript survived the museum break-in. The thieves got in during the war, at the beginning of the war, and they got everything they thought was valuable from the museum. The manuscript was found on the floor. The thieves probably didn't realize how valuable the book is, and so they just left it behind. The interesting information is that right before the war started, the manuscript was insured for $7 million because it was supposed to travel back to Iberian Peninsula, back to Spain for the exhibit. It is not known what the value of the manuscript is nowadays. It survived the Civil War in the underground bank vault, and then in 2001, Jewish community came together. They raised funds for the restoration project, but also for a climate-controlled room that was refurbished in Sarajevo National Museum to host the Haggadah as the centerpiece. Now, the interesting part is that the room where the exhibit has the Haggadah as the centerpiece, but then it is surrounded by the documents of the Catholic, Orthodox, and Muslim faiths, which basically speaks volumes about the ethnic and religious diversity of the city. And it also draws connection to the old part of the city where Orthodox Church, Roman Catholic Church, the synagogue, and Muslim mosques are all within walking distance from one another. So Haggadah today, it is well preserved. It is on a permanent exhibit in the National Museum of Culture and History in Sarajevo. This is a picture of me holding obviously a copy, but standing right next to the Sarajevo Haggadah. And you also see how the documents that I mentioned earlier are surrounding this Haggadah, the centerpiece. This is my family, so we made it a family event, and I went there with my sister and my niece and my son, and it was a great pleasure again to visit all these museums and to share so much history with children in our family. I do have to mention that we are not Jewish; we are Orthodox Christian. But why do I see a connection between my family and this important manuscript? Well, my family was in a way exiled. We've been in the city from 1564. And when the Ottomans or the Turks came into the city, we were pushed to our land, was taken away from us, and we were pushed a little bit to the suburb. And then when Austro-Hungarians came, some of the land was also taken away from us, and we were pushed a little bit more to the suburbs. And then, unfortunately, when the Civil War started, a lot of my family members were refugees, and they had to leave the city and they had to leave the country. So nowadays, I see that there are members of my family living all over the world, on pretty much every single continent. But just like Haggadah survived, and my city survived, and I see both my city and this manuscript as resilient, and I see my family as resilient as well. It is wonderful that we can, after such a long time and after so much that we've been through, such a turbulent history, that such turbulent times, that we can come together and spend time together in our city. That is the connection that, again, I saw between this manuscript and my personal history and the history of my city. So Haggadah is doing well today, and so is my family, and so is Sarajevo. This first picture is the picture of the place where Prince Ferdinand, that I mentioned earlier, was assassinated. There was a museum there, and that's another museum that I visited together with my family. This is a photo of me and my son, and the building that you see in the background is one of the buildings that were built during the Ottoman rule in the city, and I believe that it dates back to 17th or 18th century. And then this is a picture of my son in the old part of the city that you saw in earlier pictures. The National Library that burned is not too far from where this picture was taken. And then this is another photo of me and my family, and the structure you see behind dates back to, I believe, 15th century.